Afternoon, everyone. I'm Monica Ahmed, Senior Communications Advisor here at our PRA. Thank you so much for joining us today for our proposed 2024 fees consultation webinar for hazardous and special products and the Blue Box programs. So this webinar today will provide you with information about the consultation process and the proposed fees, as well as answer your questions. So just really quickly, something to go over here. So if you'd like to ask a question during the webinar, you can click on the Q&A tab that's at the bottom of your screen. Go ahead and type in your question or comment and click send. There's also an upvote feature there where you can like another person's question or comment, and that will that will actually bump up the question or comment up higher in the queue, and it'll prompt us to answer it more quickly. So we will have some time during the webinar to answer your questions. If for any reason we can't get to your question, or if you have a very specific question, please feel free to reach out to our team. You can reach them at consultations@rpra.ca. Again, that's consultations@rpra.ca. And in case you need it, we'll have that email address later on in the deck as well. And speaking of the deck, we will be sharing this deck via email, and we will be posting both the deck as well as today's recording to our website. Now that'll be posted and ready for you by the end of the week, so tomorrow essentially. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and hand it over to Noah Gitterman, who is our PRA's General Counsel and Chief of Strategic Initiatives, to kick off today's session. Over to you, Noah.
Okay, thanks, Monica. We maybe let's just go to the first slide. Yeah, we usually start these webinars off with a reminder about who RIPRA is and what we do. I say RIPRA. When I say RIPRA, I mean the Resource Productivity and Recovery Authority. We are a regulator mandated by the Ontario government with two broad mandates. One is providing digital reporting services for ministry programs. Those are the excess soil program and the hazardous waste program. The other key thing we do, of course, is supporting the transition to a circular economy. And so that involves winding up legacy waste diversion programs and then implementing the new producer responsibility framework under the RRCEA. We are an administrative authority. What that means in part is that we don't receive government funding for our services and the work we do. All of our operations are funded through fees that we charge to our registrants, and that's done on a cost recovery basis. The fee proposal we're talking about today is for 2024 fees for, I believe we're doing Blue Box and HSP programs today, and we are consulting on them now in advance of when reporting will get done in 2024. And we'll talk a bit more about timing, I think, later on. Next slide, please. So just a little bit more background on how we collect fees to recover our costs. So we have three sources of revenue. The first is the monthly charges we levy on the industry funding organizations that are winding up under the WDTA as part of those legacy waste diversion programs. The second source are the transaction fees we apply to users of the excess soil and hazardous waste registries, those digital reporting service programs. And then the third source of fees are the fees we charge to producers under our producer responsibility programs. Next slide, please. So our consultation process looks very similar to what we did last year. So again, we're consulting on fees now at the end of 2023 for 2024. So we're trying to get fees finalized before the calendar year that that they apply to. Our legislative framework requires that we consult for 45 days. And then we need to, once the fees are finalized by our board, we need to post them for 30 days before they take effect. We started this consultation on October 2nd, and it will end on November 16th. We're doing a few webinars as part of the consultation. I think this is the last one we're doing for Blue Box and HSP participants. All of the feedback we get through the webinars and in writing gets summarized for our board on finalizing fees. And then once fees are finalized, then we post a summary of that feedback to our website. So if you're interested in what that looks like, you can see our previous consultations on 2023 fees and for even earlier years on our website. So you can see what those reports look like. We do encourage feedback to the email address you see on the screen, consultations@ripra.ca. The earlier you can get us your feedback, the better. Just makes it easier for us to incorporate it into our board's decision-making process. And we're aiming to get fees finalized and publicly posted to our website by December 1st. So they are in effect by the new year. And I think that's it on process for now. We'll talk maybe a bit more about that later on. Want to kind of take you through our fee setting process. I'll give an overview now and then try to get into a bit more detail as we go. We have a general fee setting policy that's a public document on our website. This policy goes over our fee setting process, but also sets out principles that guide how RIPRA sets fees. And that's kind of those principles are used kind of throughout the steps of the process. And on the slide you're seeing now are the 5 main components of our fee setting process. And again, I'm going to go through each of these in a bit more detail. But we always start with our budget, and that's set through our annual business planning process. Then we need to, and our business plan actually is now, our budget for 2024 has been approved by our board, and our business plan is now posted on our website. And that's the starting point for setting fees for the upcoming year. Then we have a cost allocation methodology we use to identify how that budget gets allocated to each of the programs we run. Part of the reason we do that is because we operate on a shared services model. So for efficiency reasons, a lot of the frontline services we offer are shared among the programs. So we need to allocate those costs to each of the programs in a way that reflects where those resources are going and what activities are drawing on those resources. So once we allocate costs to each of our programs, then we do an adjustment to reflect deficits or surpluses from previous years. And so those stay with the program. So at the end of each year, we look at actual expenses for the program compared to what we had budgeted, and we look at actual revenues compared to what we had predicted. And that may create a deficit or surplus for the program. And that deficit or surplus stays with the program and gets wrapped up into fees set in future years. So usually there's a 1-year lag because we're setting fees before the end of the year. So when we look at deficits and surpluses now, we're looking at 2022 deficits and surpluses as part of our fee setting for 2024. And 2023 deficits and surpluses typically, I think typically those will get wrapped up into our fees for 2025. Once we have a cost recovery allocated to the program, including any deficit or surplus we need to include, that's how much we need to recover from the fee payers in that program. So we apply our fee model to that amount. And the fee model for producer responsibility programs is we're not proposing to change it for 2024. And then finally, the fee model we have, which depends in part on the number of participants, number of producers in the program, and how much supply volume they're reporting, how much obligated material they're reporting into the program. So that fee model relies on estimates of those volume numbers, and those estimates determine the final fee rate on a per kilogram basis. So that's a high level overview, but we'll get into a bit more detail as we go. So I think next up, we'll just present some information about our 2024 budget, starting on the next slide. But before we get into budget, I did want to pause for a bit and remind folks about our strategic priorities. So these are set out in our business plan. Our priorities for 2024 are the same or very similar to 2023. They were updated in 2023. So the four you see here were new or are new for 2023. And they will stay the same for 2024. And these really kind of guide where we put our resources for the year, and what we're focused on achieving for the year. So number one is ensuring we're providing registrants with accessible and easy to use registry services. All of our programs rely on an online registry to facilitate the reporting that folks need to do, producer responsibility, and our digital reporting services. So we want to make sure both on the customer support side and on the IT side that our registry services running well and is as easy as we can make it to use. Another, of course, key strategic priority we have is delivering an effective compliance program. And so this one applies obviously just to our producer responsibility programs. We do not run a compliance program for our digital reporting services, excess soil or hazardous waste. But we obviously do for our producer responsibility programs, and we want to make sure we're doing effective and efficient compliance activities to make sure we're holding the regulated community accountable and providing a level playing field for that community. Number three is providing Ontario with reliable and useful resource recovery and waste information. We have a mandate to report publicly on the information we collect through our registry, and that's true for all of our programs. And we've the past more recently, we've been focusing on improving how we do our public reporting, and there's now a webpage section of our website, I should say, dedicated to reporting publicly on performance across our producer responsibility programs and also compliance activities that we're engaged in. And finally, key priority for us is just ensuring we are an accountable organization, and we're conducting our activities in a way that's sustainable over the long term. And so we try to be as transparent as we can about what we're spending time on and where we're applying our resources, and also apply those resources in a fiscally responsible way, and in a way that ensures that we won't run into trouble, and we'll be able to. Next slide, please. So I think now we've got a summary here of our 2024 budget. So again, this is our strategic priorities and our budget, and more information about our budget is in our business plan, which is now posted on our website. And I think there are links to the business plan in this presentation. I should say that a recording of this presentation and the materials you're looking at will get posted to our website, so you can refer back to it, and any of the links you see in what we're showing on the screen here will be available to you. The picture you see here, the last column is showing our 2024 budget that's been approved by our board. It's just being compared to our 2023 budget in the first column, and that middle column is what we had forecasted last year for 2024. So we approved our 2023 business plan in fall of 2022, early fall of 2022, and we had a forecast for 2024 in that plan, and that's where the numbers in that middle column come from. So we are on mostly on track with our 2024 forecast. There are some pluses and minuses in the individual lines. So our salary and benefits line and our registry and IT support are higher than what we had forecasted, and that's mostly because we're investing more in registry and compliance support and in IT to make sure that we're providing the registry service that folks expect from us, and the compliance program that folks expect from us. And those increases are offset by reductions in some other lines, including professional fees and also amortization. That amortization line, that relates to the costs or what we invested in building all of our individual registries for each of our programs, plus the foundational components that get shared across registries. The capital cost for building those registries gets amortized over 10 years, and so we pay that off gradually, and so that's what's reflected in that amortization line. And then financing costs related to that will show up in the interest line. Next slide, please. This is another view of the overall 2024 budget, and here it's just divided up into the three sources of revenue that I talked about earlier. Our legacy WDTA programs, our digital reporting services, here they're titled EPA programs, excess oil and hazardous waste, and then our producer responsibility programs, So that's how that overall 2024 budget number breaks down in terms of the cost recovery targets for each of those revenue sources. Next slide, please. So that's a picture of our budget, right? And that's step one, or sort of component number one of that 5-step process we looked at earlier. The second one is our cost allocation methodology. So this is how we take that budget and ensure that we're allocating the right costs to the right programs. The starting point is assigning direct costs to each of our programs, and direct costs includes a couple of major components. The first one is amortization of the registry builds. So registry costs are the cost to build the registries for each of our programs is a direct cost to each program. And again, that's amortized over a 10-year period. So that amortized portion for each year is a direct cost for the program it relates to. There is also a component that's a shared registry foundational cost included as part of that amortization. There are also other direct costs for some programs, including Blue Box that we're talking about today, where there are specific activities that are related just to one program. And when that happens, we will assign those costs or make sure where those costs get allocated to the program that incurs them. That there might be, that might relate to a specific set of procedures, for example, that are only relevant to one program and not others. There are, I think, one of our programs, hazardous waste, has a call center expense that's only relevant to the hazardous waste program. So there are other direct costs. The biggest component, though, is that registry amortization. Right, I should say typically the biggest component is the registry amortization. The next step is, or the next part of our cost allocation methodology is assigning our common costs to each of the programs. Again, this is important because we run on a shared service model. So some of those common costs are typical general administration costs, remunerating our board, office supplies, some other administrative costs that get allocated to programs based on an analysis of program weight. But other common costs are activity-based costs that are really driven by volume, by the amount of activity in the program. And that's a lot of our staff salaries and IT supports, which are, I think, our two biggest budget lines. Again, because we operate on the shared service model, so we don't have, we typically don't have staff dedicated to one program or another. And the reason we do that is to make sure we can be as efficient as possible in serving the programs or running the programs we need to run. That means that we use cost drivers, which are typically focused on the number of registrants in the program in order to allocate costs and make sure that we are applying costs to the programs that are causing us to incur them, or making sure that activity levels with a program are aligned with the cost allocation to that program. In 2024, and this is how we've always done our cost allocations. In 2024, we did make a change that means that more of our budget is being allocated using these volume-based cost drivers. So again, number of registrants. And part of the reason we're doing that is just to make sure that our allocations are lining up as best they can with where the activity is coming from. And so that is a one change in 2024 that has an impact on some of the cost allocations you'll see, and we'll get into more detail about how what the numbers actually look like for Blue Box and HSP. There's a couple more parts of the steps to the cost allocation methodology. One is recovery for startup costs from when RIPRA was first created and before we could start charging fees. That just gets allocated equally to each of our programs. Final one, fourth and final one, is the contribution to our reserve. So each program contributes an amount to our reserve fund. Our reserve fund is capped in our operating agreement at 50% of our operating agreement. We our target right now is to get that reserve up to 40% of our budget, but that's an operating reserve, so we do use it throughout the year to manage our cash flows. So for a lot of our programs, revenues are coming in at different times during the year, and not on a regular basis throughout the year. And that's for our producer responsibility programs, for example. Our revenues come in when producers use the registry to report supply. And so our operating reserve is used to sort of help us manage cash flow throughout the year. So it is an important piece of our budget, in particular to help make sure that we are sustainable over the long term. Next slide, please. So this is a summary of what the cost allocations are for each of our programs for 2024, our proposed cost allocations, using the method I just summarized. And so there's a comparison here to the first column with numbers is the 2023 cost recovery target. The second is the 2024 number. And then you can see the percentage increase or decrease. So HSP is 2024 numbers are similar to what they were in 2023 as a result of our allocation. The Blue Box allocated budget is going up substantially. That's mostly due to an increase in the shared cost allocation that I talked about earlier. And that's because Blue Box has a higher proportion of registrants compared to some of our other producer responsibility programs. So we've seen a decline or a predicted decline in registrants for some of our producer responsibility programs. That means that Blue Box is drawing additional resources relative to those programs. And as I mentioned before, we're applying a greater portion of our budget based on activity levels. And that means, and because that has an impact on Blue Box, again, because of the number of registrants it has. There are also some direct costs that are specific to Blue Box that are going up, and we'll see. I think we'll see some more information about those in upcoming slides. Next slide, please. This is a view over time of the total proportion of the budget that has been allocated to each program. And so was a request from some of our stakeholders to see this view because it's hard to extract it from the business plans and annual reports we already have online. So you can spend time with this too after we post it. But it does give a view about how each program's proportion of the budget has changed, even as our budget overall has grown over time. Next slide, please. This is a bit more of a breakdown of the cost allocations for each of the programs. So you can see the amortization line at the top. Again, that relates to the capital cost for building the registry for that program, which gets amortized over 10 years. There's an interest line. Most of that interest relates to the financing for that registry cost. There are other direct expenses. And so for Blue Box, there are none for HSP. For Blue Box, that will include things like the costs of developing procedures, registry procedures that are specific to Blue Box that relate to reporting on Blue Box specific activities. Then there's the common costs, again, which are those indirect, the general admin costs, plus the program's share of our shared services. And again, that's mostly driven by a number of registrants in the program. Blue Box has a high share of that because of the number of registrants it has. It is the biggest producer responsibility program we have. And then the last line is the last two pieces of that cost allocation methodology, the contribution to the operating reserve and paying off those early startup costs from when Ripper was first created. Next slide, please. So that is the first two components of those 5 components of our fee setting process we looked at earlier. The third component is the adjustment we do for surpluses and deficits. So what I just presented is the amounts allocated to the program for the 2024 budget. But as I talked about earlier, there can be surpluses or deficits from previous years, which get wrapped up into our overall cost recovery target for the program. And so differences in expenses or in revenues from what we predicted stay with the program and get wrapped up into future fees. So I think for both for HSP and for Blue Box, we're looking at surpluses and deficits from 2022, the 2022 calendar year, are getting wrapped up now into our 2024 fees. Sometimes that we don't maintain that 2-year gap if there are very large surpluses or deficits that we need to address, and wouldn't make sense to wait that extra year. But I think in for both HSP and Blue Box, we're looking at 2022 deficits and surpluses. We're not considering anything from 2023. Next slide, please. This summary here just shows you the surplus or deficit we are incorporating. So there's a small deficit for HSP that's being applied. When that's applied, the total cost recovery target for HSP is about 2% more than what it was in 2023. That's what we're proposing for 2024. And then for Blue Box, there is a substantial surplus from 2022. So when we apply that to our cost recovery target, the year-over-year increase is 13%. For 2024 compared to 2023. Next slide, please. Oh, and we got to stop here. So again, just to summarize, we went through sort of the first three components of the fee setting process: our budget, our cost allocation, and then surpluses and deficits. So next up, we'll talk about our fee model and start looking at what our proposed fee rates are.
Great. Thank you, Noah. So like you said, we'll pause here for a few questions. So I'm just going to run down the list here. We've got a few. So sorry, excuse me, just 1 second. Okay. So we have a question here. It's got a few upvotes as well. So the question is, what strategies are our PRA or what strategies is our PRA executing to increase registration into the program for those producers that remain unaligned? So I'm thinking probably referring to free riders here. For example, will penalties be considered for those producers that have not registered or started to contribute to expenses? How can fees be more fairly distributed?
Right. So so we take that into account in a couple of ways. Our compliance team has a number of tools available to it to make sure the folks that are supposed to be registering and paying fees are in fact doing that. Information about compliance activities on our website. And I think that includes the number of compliance cases that we're opening and closing in the year. I think it may also include information specifically on free riders. Penalties are available to be applied to folks that should have been registering and didn't. Whether penalties get applied or not is a decision for the compliance team to make. But when we do bring in folks who haven't registered but should have, they do pay fees for the years that they should have been reporting for. So they need to make themselves whole in terms of the fees they owe RIPRA. And we also take it into account because our estimates for the number of producers and the volume we expect is based not on who's actually reported, but on what we expect on what we expect from the market, and how many producers we expect there to be, and how much material we think is obligated. So the fee rate you see isn't based only on who has in fact reported in the current year, but does take into account an estimate of how many producers we think there are in total and how much material we think they should be reporting to us in total. Obviously, we can't know those numbers for sure because we can't know what we don't know. But when we do find producers who haven't registered and should have, they do need to report everything they should have been reporting and then pay the fees associated with that.
Thank you, Noah. That's a great question as well. So thanks for submitting that. So next question, I believe this came in, Noah, when you were doing the overview of the cost allocation. So the question is, what is an example of a non-registry amortization cost?
A non-registry amortization cost. That's a good question. There are some technology at RIPRA we have is amortized, I think, over some period of time. And I'm thinking about things like laptops. There may be other equipment we have that gets amortized. I think, though, the main component of that amortization line is our registry build and the capital cost to build our registries. But there are some other, there is some other equipment we have that gets amortized. And I think the best example I can think of that is our computer equipment.
Thank you, Noah. So next question is, what oversight is there on fees charged by RIPRA?
Yeah, that's a good question. So what you're seeing now is a fee proposal. So this fee proposal is sort of a product of as I mentioned before, kind of comes out of our annual budget. Our budget is approved by our board of directors. So we have a board of directors that oversees RIPRA management. The board of directors is made up of 5 individuals that are appointed by the minister and 6 elected directors. And they approve RIPRA's. 2 of the most important things that or decisions that our board makes is to approve our business plan and our budget for the upcoming year. They have to do that every year under our statute, and they have to approve fees. So our fee proposal, when our fee consultation period ends, again, we wrap up what we've heard, and the feedback, the proposal and our feedback goes to our board, and our board makes the final decision on fees. So there is a lot of oversight from our board on both our budget and our fees, and the ultimate decision for those things rests with our independent board. We do have an accountability relationship with the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks. So the ministry and the minister do review our business plan before it's finalized. And we have a number of accountability and transparency requirements that are built in both to our governing statute and our operating agreement with the ministry. And that includes making sure that we're, as transparent as we can be about what we're spending money on and why, and trying to ensure that we've got performance indicators in our business plan, and that we report out on those, on how we did perform in our annual report. So in addition to the business plan that's produced in advance of the upcoming year, we also produce an annual report once the year is out, with audited financial statements and a summary of how we performed relative to our key performance indicators. And we have been making improvements again to how we do our public reporting, which includes both reporting on the performance of our producer responsibility programs, but also on RIPRA activities, including compliance activities. And you can see some of that on our website already. So that's some of the ways that we are accountable to our board, and that our board is accountable to the ministry and the minister.
Thank you, Noah. So moving on to the next question. With improved efficiency, will overall costs be reduced in 2024?
Overall costs are, I think, predicted to go up in 2024 by, the overall budget is going up by 4%, but that impacts different programs differently, obviously, as we've seen for Blue Box and HSP. RIPRA has been in a period of high growth over the past couple of years. Lots of new programs launching, and still getting fully implemented on the ground. I think 2024 is the first year where we will not have a new program launching, and don't have a new program lined up to launch. So we are hoping that we are able to stabilize operations and look forward to more predictability in budget growth, and then likewise more predictability in fees. Our business plan does have a forecast for 2025 and 2026 budget. So our 2024 budget is in line with what we forecasted last year. So we will be focused on those forecasts when we start setting our budget and fees for 2025.
Thank you, Noah. All right, got a few more questions here, so just going to try to run through them. So the next question here is the operating reserve used to manage cash flow returned to the reserve during the year? And just to follow up to that, is the reserve replenished during the year?
Yes. So yeah, the short answer is yes. The reserve gets replenished. That reserve gets attributed to the operating reserve. And again, the target is, I think for 2024, is to try to get it up to 40% of our budget. When I think that it's predicted to get there, I think by 2026, and then at least right now, we think that'll give us the comfort we need that we'll be able to weather any unexpected expenses or cash flow issues.
Thanks, Noah. All right, moving on to the next question. Is RIPRA considering any changes to the 2024 fees models as was done in 2023 for HSP?
We are not proposing any. We are always open to feedback and suggestions and comments, but we're not proposing any changes for 2024 fees. I think we are open to looking at fee models in the future, especially as we stabilize our operations and sort of move out of this growth phase that we've been in for the last couple of years. So that may happen in the future, but we're not planning on it in 2024.
Thanks, Noah. Just a couple more questions here. What do you anticipate to be the % increase in fees in 24 versus this year?
Yeah, so that's coming up in the next couple of slides. I think for HSP, it's flat year over year. Blue Box, I believe we'll be seeing about a 10% increase in the per kilogram rate. But we'll get into that in the next couple of slides.
Sounds good. Thank you. And the last question we've got here, given the volatility upwards of interest rates, is the interest being paid by RIPRA based on a line of credit with a variable rate or fixed rate loans?
That depends. So there is a mix, and there is a lot of detail about our bank financing in our business plan. Again, which is now posted on our website, and there are if you got an email for this webinar, you will likely get an email about the business plan getting posted, but it's also linked to in this presentation, which will get posted on our website. So you can find out more information in the business plan.
Sorry, having some tech issues there. Thanks, Noah. And also just want to let everyone know that if you just go to our homepage, you can see the business plan linked right from there. There'll be a green box. I believe it's a green box. And if you just click on that, it'll take you to the post about our business plan and the business plan itself. All right, so I'll go ahead and we can move on to the next slide. And also, sorry, just a reminder that we will have some time for questions at the end as well. So if folks have more questions, please feel free to submit them.
Okay, so next up is our fee model and fee rates. So like I just explained, we're proposing the same fee model in 2024 that we had in 2023 for all of our producer responsibility programs. So there's no change there. There is an increase in the flat fee for small producers that we're proposing. And then for other producers that aren't under that small producer threshold, there is a variable fee rate. And for the tires program, that's a per tire rate. For every other program, that's a per kilogram rate. There's more information on this slide about why we use a variable rate and a weight-based rate. And if you look at consultation reports from 2022 and earlier, you can also see an explanation of why we use a per kilogram rate. And it comes in part from the principles set out in our fee setting policy. And some of one of the reasons we use that variable rate is because it does protect smaller producers from excessive fee burden. Another reason we use it is to ensure that no producers have a competitive advantage from ripper fees on a per product basis. I think coming up is just some more detail about our fee model. And but I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this. It's probably more helpful just to dive into the fee rates. So maybe we can go to the next slide. This slide shows a summary of the fee rate changes for all of our programs year over year. So we can see here for HSP, fees are essentially flat year over year. So there was a I think a small decrease in the cost allocation to the program as a result of our cost allocation methodology year over year, but there was also a small deficit from 2022 that we need to recover, and I think those two kind of canceled each other out. So it's essentially flat fee rates, and I believe our volume estimate. So the other component of the fee rates is not just the budget or the program allocation, but how much volume, how much material we're estimating will get reported in the year. Because it's a per kilogram rate, that'll have a big impact in the final amount. I think for HSP, we're assuming similar volumes to what we've seen or what we expected in 2023. For Blue Box, the year-over-year change is about 10%. Again, I talked a little bit about the program allocation increases that are leading to that increase. And that is getting offset by a surplus that we're carrying over from 2022. Next slide, please. So we'll take a closer look at Blue Box fees. Here are the fee rates with that showing the 10% change year over year. And there's just a bit more detail here about what we're estimating in terms of volume. So we're estimating additional supply in 2024 from what we estimated in 2023. And again, as we learn more about the program and more about how much supply actually is obligated, that gets wrapped up into our fees. And again, there's that surplus from 2022 that we're getting wrapped up into fees for 2024. Next slide, please. This shows just a more detailed breakdown of the fee change and what's contributing to it. So again, you can see the program allocation itself is going up, and then that's being offset to some extent by an increase in our supply volume estimates and that surplus from 2022. Next slide, please. This is another view of the cost allocation to the program, but just showing more directly a comparison to 2023 and where those changes are coming from. And I think we talked about how the biggest change for Blue Box is in those shared cost model, is in that shared cost piece, in part because of the number of registrants in the Blue Box program, and that more of our budget is sort of focused on activities that are volume based. So more of our budget is getting allocated based on where that activity is coming from. Next slide, please. Then we've got similar slides for the HSP fees. So these are the rates for our fee rates for the 4 variable rate material categories in HSP. Just as a reminder, the HSP fee model was updated in 2023 to better balance fees across the very different kinds of materials that are reporting to RIPRA as part of that program. And then there's just some additional info at the bottom. Estimates. So again, we are estimating the same volume, or at least the fee rates you see here are assuming that there's the same volume as supplied in 2024 as what we estimated for 2023. I believe reporting for 2023 is still going on, or maybe recently concluded. So we may update these rates if we see substantial changes in what's getting reported, and if our compliance team decides that it needs to update its estimates of kind of how much material is actually obligated out there. So that estimate may get updated before we finalize, may have an impact on the final rates, but for now, we're assuming the same as 2023. Next slide, please. Here we have a breakdown for the automotive materials on the one hand and paints on the other, just showing the components of the fee change. Obviously, the overall change is not very big. And again, you just see the decrease in the cost allocation, which is small, being offset by deficit from 2022. Next slide, please. This slide, similar to the blue box one, shows just a clearer picture, I think, of the 2023 to 2024 comparison of each of those cost components. And again, very similar year over year for HSP. And that's concludes the substantive part of the presentation. We do want to get your feedback and your comments and suggestions. We also want to get your questions. So if you do have questions about this proposal and you didn't get a chance to or didn't want to ask them during this webinar, you can email us at consultations@ripra.ca and we'll try to get back to you before the consultation is over. Or if you did ask a question but thought my answer was insufficient, you can reach out over email and we'll try to connect.
Thank you, Noah. So in addition to getting your feedback on the proposed fees, we'd also love to get your feedback on this webinar itself, so we can use that information to hopefully improve future webinars for you and provide you with the info that you need. So I'm actually going to go ahead and launch a quick poll. I won't keep it up for too long. Just give it a minute for folks to go ahead and answer that. And as I mentioned, if there are any additional questions, you can submit them. But as of now, Noah, it doesn't look like we have any further questions. So just to reiterate Noah's point, you can always email them into us as well at consultations@ripra.ca. So just going to give it a little bit longer, about another 30 seconds for folks to answer. See the numbers still going up, so just going to leave that up for a little bit longer so people can submit their responses. All right. I'm going to go ahead and close the poll in just a second. Thank you everyone for providing your responses. We really appreciate it. All right, no, just gonna have a quick look and make sure we don't have any other questions that came in, and nope, doesn't look like we do. So with that, I think we can actually go ahead and wrap up today's session unless you had anything to add.
Nothing to add from me, except just a final reminder, you can check out our business plan on our website and information about the consultation on our website.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Noah. Thanks everyone for joining us this afternoon. Have a good one.
Thank you.
Thanks.